Hello and welcome to a Tuesday live right here on the early line on SportsGrid and all across the SportsGrid network. That includes sportsgrid.com/watch, where you can find your favorite destination to consume everything all across the grid. He is Donnie right side. I am Ben Stevens. We are together here on this Tuesday, bright and early on the early line up until 11 a.m. Eastern time. 3 hours to get you set for a monumental Tuesday night around the country in college basketball. Multiple top 25 tilts that we will break down as we look back on an evening of college hoops to kick off the final 4 weeks before Selection Sunday. We're at the NBA All-Star break, a couple of more days off to reset where the league stands. The playoff push around the association with under 30 games left for every team in the NBA and plenty to get to in the National Football League. Today, beginning a 2-week window where the franchise tags around the NFL will be front and center. DRS, let's have a good time over these next 3 hours.
Oh, we will. It feels like a sprint too, right, Ben? You take a look at the last week here of February into March we go. And as we already said ad nauseum over the past couple of days, we are waiting for the sun to stay out longer, the basketball games to improve, and also the boys of summer to start to make an appearance in the month of March as we open Major League Baseball season. It's a good time here, and we got you covered for sure.
We will have some spring training talk. We will have some baseball conversations. Can the hot stove heat up right before spring training fully begins around MLB, with games on the diamond coming your way very shortly? But it starts to feel like March the deeper you get into conference action around college basketball. And that was the case last night at the Fertitta Center in Houston. A top 6 tilt. Number 2, Houston hosting number 6, Iowa State. Before we break down the game, we welcome in our SportsGrid radio audience. Opening hour of a Tuesday, live right here on the early line. Sirius XM Channel 159. All of our radio terrestrial affiliates now in the fold as well. He is Donnie. I am Ben. Number 2, Houston. Number 6, Iowa State. Last night in H-Town, a pivotal matchup in the Big 12 title race here in the regular season, as both the Cougs and the Clones entered with a 9-3 Big 12 record. Houston is now 10-3. Iowa State is 9-4. But the Cyclones do cover. Sometime the hook giveth, and sometimes it taketh. You make your free throws and you don't foul. That's what TJ Otzelberger decided to do in the final 25 seconds as Houston wins by 8, 73-65. Iowa State covers as an 8.5-point dog.
And they weren't bad last night either, going on the road against one of the best defensive teams, if not the best defensive team in the country. 42% from the floor, but they actually shot 53% from three-point range. It still wasn't good enough here. The Houston Cougars, by far, for me, the best team in the Big 12. That was a big game in the standings here to go forward. Who's going to win the regular season championship there? Looks like Houston put their stamp on approval and said, you know what? Looks like it's going to be us. That's a well-rounded performance. But by the way, if you had the under in that game until 28-23 at the break and just figured, okay, let's score a little bit more in the second half, they really hit the gas pedal in the second half. That was a shame to lose that under on that, because in that first half, it was a stone-cold under that really got away with the fouls late in the game.
And that was the story of the line at the very least. When Donnie and I were breaking down this game yesterday, 127 and a hook for the most efficient defense in college basketball. Houston, third most efficient on the other side in Iowa State, steamed all the way up to 133.5 by tip, and that total does go over. Plenty more reaction coming around college basketball as we dive even deeper. An ACC and in-state showdown in the Commonwealth last night between Virginia Tech and Virginia. The Cavaliers on the road in Blacksburg, and welcome to the castle. A 34-point victory for the Hokies at home, 75-41, their largest margin of victory over their in-state foes in UVA in more than a decade and a half. Virginia Tech covered as a 3.5-point home favorite.
Yeah, we saw that line yesterday and said, boy, this one doesn't seem all that right. And how many times have we seen a team going up against a ranked opponent at home, unranked, and certainly the favorite? You sort of play that favorite side, and boy, oh boy, maybe a 3 or 4 point victory would have been enough, but 75-41. And also, this is what the APB that we put out for late in the season. That's why everybody cheers against the Virginia Cavaliers, hoping they either miss the tournament or get knocked out early because the style they play. Sure, they would love to win 48-47, but it's nice to see Virginia Tech will All I asked for yesterday, Ben, just be efficient from the three-point line and be average. They were, and they pounded the Cavs last night.
UVA in a very dicey spot here down the stretch. Next up, Carolina. Virginia needs to win some basketball games to feel safe and secure come just under 4 weeks, and that being Selection Sunday. Women's college basketball, huge slate yesterday. Top 25 tilt between 20th ranked Creighton on the road against 15th ranked UConn. In fact, the Blue Jays did move back to 21st in the recent AP poll released yesterday afternoon. No issue for Paige Beckers, Gino Auriemma, and UConn. A perfect 15-0 now in Big East play. They clinch at least a share of the regular season crown, and they win by 20, 73-53. UConn covering as a 19.5-point home favorite. Win number 1,203 for Gino Auriemma. That victory yesterday passes Coach K on the all-time wins leaderboard in college hoops.
Yeah, it's crazy. You're like, UConn not having that great of a season until you say that they're 15-0 now in conference play. Now, granted, some of the other bigger teams are in other Power 5 conferences. I understand that, but still a solid season, and also losing a lot of those players to injury and or fighting through injuries at this time. You know what's interesting about this game, Ben? 73-53. Each team only scored 1 point off of the bench, so starters rule here.
Paige Beckers, a game-high 24 points for Connecticut. Speaking of UConn, now on the men's side, for the first time this year, we have a unanimous number 1 team in the country. 62 first-place votes yesterday in the AP poll. All 62 going to Dan Hurley's Huskies, the reigning national champs. A huge game tonight in Omaha against Creighton. That's a top 15 tilt. Let's complete the UConn trifecta. Kevin Ollie, former UConn head coach who led the Huskies to the 2014 national championship, has been named the interim head coach for the Brooklyn Nets after the Nets fired Jacques Vaughn yesterday.
Hey, Kevin Ollie's been fired a few times already in his career. He'll be fired again from Brooklyn, but hey, make that money, man. Can't blame anybody. That is a dead-end job in Brooklyn. Good luck to whoever tries to take that.
More NBA news. Mike Conley inking a 2-year, $21 million extension with the best team in the Western Conference, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the T-Wolves 39-16. And now let's get to the Daytona 500. Some people might have thought in Indianapolis, of course not, to start the NASCAR season down in the Sunshine State, where weather was a factor. Under the caution flag at the very end, William Byron wins the Daytona 500, 18-1. He entered the race tied for the 11th best number. Brad Keselowski, he finished 33rd. I don't know who said Keselowski was a long shot price yesterday.
Yeah, he should have won that race here. Got rigged at the end. Maybe we even got credit. I didn't check the account yet. Did I get credited back for that Keselowski crash where I thought he was going to win it? Should have been credited back if it wasn't.
I think so, just because you became a NASCAR guy after being a hockey guy over the weekend, giving out picks and plays. Big crash at the end. That's what really hampered Keselowski in terms of his finish. A night around college basketball next.
Best player in the NBA until proven otherwise. Like, you have that guy on your team, you win 50 games, it's really that simple.
There is voter fatigue, and I think that is the only thing you have to be careful about when you deal with the NBA is there voter fatigue in regards to who should win the MVP? When you look at the odds, and obviously you get, no Halliburton.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8, right? This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8. 6 you lose, 7 you push, 8 you win. So it's going to come down to the end.
And he missed the 3, and they are not going to foul. They're not going to foul. He just drove and scored, though. Oh, they gave up a dunk with 14.1 to go.
In-game live, prime time, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
What about any confidence, faith, optimism for them to get back into the top 4?
But in terms of the league form, a lot of times it kind of drops off towards the end of the season because he demands a lot of his players. And they don't quite have the subs for rotation that some of the other teams around them have. So a little bit of a drop-off, I think, is expected for Aston Villa here.
Pro League Soccer powered by Marca. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Officially less than 4 weeks away from Selection Sunday in college basketball. We enter the zone to recap a big Monday night and set up a Super Tuesday. Monumental matchups all around the sport. There will be a big focus on that coming your way in hour number 3. But here in this opening hour, we look back. A top 6 tilt last night in Houston. The number 2 team now in the country, the Cougars of Houston, taking on the 6th-ranked Iowa State Cyclones in a matchup that would determine pole position in the solo number 1 spot in the Big 12 conference standings, a spot that Houston now occupies. 10-3 the record for the Cougs in Big 12 play. 9-4 now the number 4 Iowa State. Both teams entered 9-3. It was a gruesome first half, a really big battle in the Big 12 where we knew physicality and defense would be front and center. 51 points combined between the two teams in the opening half, 87 in the second as the offensive output ratcheted up and Houston wins 73-65. Closing numbers, 133.5 for a total. It steams to the over 8.5 points, the spread in favor of Houston. Iowa State does cover by the hook.
Yeah, and it was a great game to try to watch and figure it out because if you took it a tale of two halves, Ben, which is exactly what you had, 28-23, and again, coming from an under perspective there, what's your thought process? You know the second half is usually going to be higher scoring, and it wasn't a game that was 31-13 at the break where you figured that it would just be a runaway and they'll just choke the clock out. It was only a 5-point game at the break, so you figured you would get some of those extended free throws. But again, if Iowa State scored 23 in the first half, a lot of points in the second half would be what? 33 points? Same thing with Houston, scored 28 points. What's a lot of points? I don't know, maybe 40 at the most. Well, they wind up going 45-42 in the second half, blasting that over. But I do like the fact that you can have one of these games, Ben, and see that the offenses aren't working. Because, again, I always look forward to what I'm going to get out of March Madness. You can have games like this. Hey, guys, remember that game we scored 28 points in the first half against a top 6 opponent here, but then we scored 45 in the second half? We can click as long as we make the adjustments. And both teams, quite frankly, made very good adjustments at the half. But if you were looking to steal that under, what do you want to see? Hey, guys, walk off the court. Doesn't look like we're going to be able to come back. The continuous fouls and the prey to the free throw line really did that under in. But that's a good win by the Houston Cougars. We weren't waking up this morning surprised that the Houston Cougars won by margin. This was as expected yesterday. And as you talked about in the Big 12, you're top of the standings now. It is your conference to win now.
Jamal Shed, a game-high 26 points. The veteran point guard for Kelvin Sampson that has been there for every run to an Elite Eight and a Final Four for this Houston team in the last 3 college basketball seasons. 26 points out of him. Emmanuel Sharp, an X-Factor, 20 big points as well for the Cougs. When you look at Houston, Donnie, maybe the team we're not talking about enough. We all have considered UConn the most dominant team, Purdue a peg behind, and then the rest. Houston is right there in the big 3 in my estimation. They are ranked number 1 in the Ken Palm efficiency ratings, a number they have been at for the last 85 consecutive days. That doesn't happen in college basketball, regardless of how dominant you have been. And Houston has been ahead of Connecticut in those metrics. Houston has won 9 of its last 10 games as a single-digit favorite, just 1-4 against the spread. But a huge victory for the Cougs on this Monday. Short turnaround from hosting Texas on Saturday. Now some days off to prepare for a monumental road matchup on Saturday afternoon in Waco, taking on Baylor. The Bears, a big game tonight out in Provo. But entering last night, Donnie, the Cougars minus 180 to win the Big 12. With the victory, now it's minus 270 for this Houston team in its opening year in Big 12 conference action, who dropped its first 2 games. And Donnie, we all said, hey, you can win 17 in the American, now play with the big boys in the Big 12. Kelvin Sampson has his Houston team playing very large.
Yeah, and that's the problem right before. We probably should have jumped on those numbers going like, come on, Houston is going to rebound. We know this, but also you had that in the back of your head. Well, maybe they don't rebound. Maybe they just have a quality season in the Big 12 because it's a step up from the American. But also you brought up a great point here. We're taking a look at a Houston team that's been so efficient in the past. It's one thing, Ben, to be efficient in the American Conference, right? But it's another thing when you flip it over and say to yourself, let's be ultra efficient and still be one of the best teams, if not the best team on defense in the country in the Big 12. There's 6 ranked teams in the Big 12 on a night-to-night basis. You are getting a haymaker punch specifically if you go on the road. That's what makes it so more impressive. This year, again, being battle-tested heading into the tournament, it's not like, hey, we're going to sweep through the conference, we're going to sweep through the conference tournament, and then we'll find our way in the NCAAs. No, they're already battle-tested here from facing adversity early in the season, then heading into the conference tournament, and then in the March Madness. I love this version of the Houston Cougars. They are really battle-tested.
And by the hook last night, Iowa State does cover. The Cyclones now 6-2 against the number as an underdog this year. 10-3 ATS in Big 12 play. The only team in this monster of a conference that is covering in more than 70% of its conference games, and it's higher than that, more than a 75% clip. For TJ Otzelberger and Iowa State, the Clones will be just fine. Tamin Lipsey, their outstanding point guard as a sophomore, not a great night last night, only 1 of 8 from the floor. Iowa State is going to be a team to keep an eye on come March. From the Big 12 to the ACC, in-state showdown between Virginia and Virginia Tech. At this time yesterday, the Wahoos were a top 25 team. They got out of the AP poll, bounced out of it entering last night's matchup against the Hokies. And going to Blacksburg is no easy trip, as Virginia found out last night. 75-41, the victory for Va Tech. The Hokies cover as a 3.5-point home favorite. Donnie, it was a line we looked at yesterday and said, you can read the numbers. That line is 3.5 in favor of Va Tech for a reason. They made good on being the favored side at home.
Exactly. Like Virginia came in 11-4 in conference play in that game. You take a look at Virginia Tech out here at 6-8 in conference. Say, well, what gives at this point here? Well, this is still, as we say, it's hard to win on the road, particularly in a rivalry situation, which Virginia and Virginia Tech find themselves in. But the one thing I always get back to, you beg for Virginia to be efficient every single game in a slow down tempo, which always leaves you very little margin for error, which means you could get upset, which we've seen them quite a few times in NCAA action against an inferior opponent. If you limit the possessions, the other team shoots the lights out, there's really a tough chance or really an impossible shot that you might not only get upset, but also not be moving on at that point. But having said that from the game last night, This wasn't one of those like, hey, man, we just didn't get up possessions, 48-47 loss. Like, no, you got hammered in this basketball game. And the efficiency that we usually expect from Virginia, 17 of 52 from the floor, which is only 32%, which they actually shoot from a percentage-wise, Ben, in ACC play better than anybody in the conference. They shot 16% from long-range shooting, 2 of 12. And we talk about, okay, we were being physical. Not enough. Only 7 total free throw attempts. They got wasted last night. We thought, Ben, Virginia Tech would win this game and be live just based on the line, but I didn't see this type of blowout there in Blacksburg.
Vaughn Tech entered last night losing 4 of its last 5 games, did not cover any of the 4 defeats, but booked as an underdog in all 4. Now as a favorite, they have covered in their last 4 games. Something to pay attention to. Virginia, meanwhile, 1-3 straight up and against the spread as a dog in ACC action. Virginia's got some work to do to solidify its resume. If the season ended today, the Cavaliers would be in, I think, to the NCAA tournament. But to make Selection Sunday not an absolute sweat, some work for UVA down the stretch. Women's college basketball, a historic evening for Gino Auriemma. 1,203 victories now, the second most in the history of Division I hoops. Only 6 wins behind Tara Vanderveer, the head coach of Stanford women's college basketball. The win yesterday moves him in front of Mike Krzyzewski. When you look at the final score, 73-53. UConn victorious in a top 25 matchup against Creighton. The Huskies cover as a 19.5-point favorite. 15-0 now in Big East play. All 15 victories by at least 15 points. 14 of the 15 DRS by 20 or more. Buy or sell in the NBA at the All-Star break next.
best player in the NBA until proven otherwise. Like, you have that guy on your team, you win 50 games, it's really that simple.
There is voter fatigue, and I think that is the only thing you have to be careful about when you deal with the NBA is there voter fatigue in regards to who should win the MVP? When you look at the odds, and obviously you get, no Halliburton.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8, right? This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8. 6 you lose, 7 you push, 8 you win. So it's going to come down to the end.
And he missed the 3, and they are not going to foul. They're not going to foul. He just drove and scored, though. Oh, they gave up a dunk with 14.1 to go.
In-game live, prime time, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
What about any confidence, faith, optimism for them to get back into the top 4?
But in terms of the league form, a lot of times it kind of drops off towards the end of the season because he demands a lot of his players. And they don't quite have the subs for rotation that some of the other teams around them have. So a little bit of a drop-off, I think, is expected for Aston Villa here.
Pro League Soccer powered by Marca, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
It is the All-Star break around the association. They were off yesterday. We are off today, off tomorrow. Action returns on Thursday evening in the NBA. So it allows us a time to play a game that we love here on the early line. At the All-Star break, it is time for NBA buy or sell. I knew we had the stinger in the rundown. I wasn't sure we were going to get to it, but we did, DRS. That animation was there. So the conversation after the All-Star game, the highest scoring output we had ever seen in the history of the All-Star game, the East victorious with 211 points, is what are we going to do to this format? Do the players care? It is not competitive. It is not the best basketball product available with the biggest stars in the world in this sport. Anthony Edwards, one of the rising stars in this sport, was asked about the All-Star game and its format afterward. He said, quote, "For me, it's an All-Star game, so I don't think I will ever look at it like being super competitive. It's always fun. I don't know what they can do to make it more competitive. It's always fun. But I don't know what they can do to make it more competitive. It's a break. I don't think nobody wants to come here and compete." So the buy or sell question following the remarks from Ant, buy or sell, Donnie right side. NBA All-Star Weekend is dead.
I'm buying it. I'm absolutely buying it here. And it's not the fault of the NBA. It's not the fault of the NBA players. It's just the evolution of society here with social media, something that we don't usually get to see. Like, Ben, if you equate it to, let's just say, Major League Baseball, let's go before, like, the late 90s where everyone, hey, we got to, have National League play American League. It was a pretty cool sport that it was separated where it's like, oh, my goodness. Like the Phillies might end up playing the Oakland A's in the World Series. We never see the Oakland A's in Philadelphia here. Well, now we see the Oakland A's probably like every 3 years, and the luster has worn off there. And what are you going to do with these superstar players? Do you want them to play in a pickup game where there's, technical fouls and hard fouls and flagrant fouls and guys are getting hurt and there's fist fights on the court? It's never going to get back to that. We're never going to rescue it and get back those glory days of the early 80s, mid 80s, and early 90s here where the superstars played. They played hard, but it was maybe the only time as a kid you got to see Magic Johnson play because he wasn't on TNT every single night. You couldn't go to Twitter or X or social media and find those highlights at this point. So I am buying it's dead, but it's not really the NBA's fault. It's just the evolution of society. Every single All-Star game is dead on arrival at this point. It's now what you make of it here, and maybe it is just for the kids at this point. Well, they will enjoy that because once you're at late teen years, into your 20s and 30s, it's dead, man. It just is, man.
Yeah, it really seems like that. Back in the day, it was competitive. It was a display for all the best players around the NBA to be out there and showcase their best basketball. There was a clip that circulated yesterday, Kobe Bryant speaking about the All-Star game, and obviously he had an edge and a competitiveness to him that not many people in the history of sports have ever had. And he made a point that guys play harder in summer pickup games at UCLA when they're getting ready for a new season during the summer than they do in the All-Star game. We want to see the best pickup game in the world. We don't need to see 105-100, a defensive battle like we do in the NBA postseason. But you want to see the best pickup game you've ever seen. You want to see the competition rear its ugly head, maybe some smack talk in between. Again, I don't really have an issue with what we are seeing in the All-Star game. Is it the best product of basketball? Is there a level of intensity and effort that we would see in other sports, in other days around the association? Absolutely not. But I think if you go in with the expectation, hey, you're probably going to see one of the two teams score 200 and take ridiculous shots, then you kind of just enjoy the spectacle of it all. At least that's my assessment on where things stand right now for the All-Star game. I did agree with James Young in his breakdown yesterday. If you want to really add incentive back, USA versus the world would be a lot of fun. But again, I don't think you're going to convince the players, Donnie, and that's a portion of it too. Fans, spectators, people paying attention around the league. We can all be mad. We can all feel chagrin at how things play out. But it's also the investment from the players, and I don't think they're really going to buy into the idea of having to compete in another big game midway during what is their break from regular season action.
And also, there's no really hiding the All-Star game anymore, because you can use this point, and some people have, well, how do we, take it away from mid-season? We don't stop the season. But at the end, it'll be just a fun thing after the finals, and we'll have one weekend in Vegas. We'll play the All-Star game. Well, that didn't work with the NFL, the most popular product in the United States. They play their, All-Star game / Pro Bowl at the end of every season, and it's terrible to watch even then, and fans get upset with that here. It's just where we're at in a society. Now, the NFL's actually moved on from the game itself, and quite frankly, if the NBA just moved on from the game and had an all-star weekend with fun, maybe that would help, but nobody's going to fix this. We're not going to put that, the rabbit back into the hat at this point. It's already a wrap. There's no way to get around this. They're not going to play hard at this point. And quite frankly, it's great that you read that, soliloquy here from Anthony Edwards that basically was like, yeah, they tell us, and we don't care. Like, we're going to have fun, and it's a fun time. It's not competitive. It will never be competitive. The players are telling you right now it's never going to get back to being competitive, so we'll just deal with it and take it for what it is.
We'll see what the NBA league office does. Adam Silver seemed none too pleased with the result on Sunday evening in Indianapolis. But now here we are at the All-Star break. 2 more days off before we return into the home stretch. And listen, there's less than 30 games left in this regular season for every team. This is not the halfway point to make your adjustments and figure things out. If you are in a position to make a playoff push, you're looking for those top 10 spots in each conference. 7 through 10, play-in tournament, 1 through 6 automatically into the playoffs. So here's where the NBA championship prices are at this moment. Boston, the best team in the association, the favorites to win the title, plus 260, nearly $2 in front of the reigning champs, the Denver Nuggets at plus 440. The Clippers at plus 550. The Bucks at 6-1. Only 4 teams, Donnie, with 3 digits in their price at a 6-1 number or less. So buy or sell. The conference championship matchups, Eastern Conference, Western Conference, will be comprised of those 4 best prices to win an NBA championship.
I don't think so. So I'm going to sell that at this point, because there are some teams lurking down there in like those 5th, 6th, and 7th spots here that I do think can do some damage here late in the season. Now, granted, we don't have a crystal ball out, Ben, that's going to tell us who's going to get injured and who's going to play well. But you have a feeling if you're lining teams up, and I've already said this before, I still think the Philadelphia 76ers are much more intriguing now that Joel Embiid is injured than when they actually had Joel Embiid, because that pathway towards actually winning the Eastern Conference, you would feel would need an MVP like Joel Embiid playing well. But now that he's not there, you give the rest of the guys chances to step up and hone their skills, like Tyrese Maxey and Buddy Hield comes over, that when you do get Joel Embiid back here, you might get him for that sprint in the playoffs, which might be enough as the catalyst to take over some of those teams that you haven't beat in the past and actually make it to an Eastern Conference Finals. And the same thing, you take a look out west here. It's so stacked from top to bottom. Who's to say the Dallas Mavericks now, sitting in that 7th seed, can't make a run here with Luka Doncic playing incredible basketball along with Kyrie Irving and being healthy on the court at the same time? Maybe a team like the Los Angeles Lakers catches fire with 2 top players in the NBA with Anthony Davis and LeBron James in the second half here. So I'm going to sell that here, because there's so many quality teams that are lurking right now that one just may be able to get hot at the right time, and Ben healthy at the right time to come in with a nice ticket price.
I'm going to sell it as well. One, for the matter of fact that I have an NBA championship ticket on the Phoenix Suns, so I expect them to be in the NBA Finals, or at least the Western Conference Finals at bare minimum. And then also the idea, well, when you look at the Eastern Conference, I think Boston is going to be there without a doubt. I still think Milwaukee, if I had to pick that second team at this moment, would reach the Eastern Conference Finals. But let's not forget the Heat, who have been there 3 of the last 4 years and have never been a world beater for the most part throughout regular season action in the NBA. Still think that second team in the Eastern Conference very much up in the air. The West is loaded, as Donnie mentioned. I think the Clippers can be there. I think the Suns can be there. I think the defending champs in Denver can certainly be there. And I'm still holding out hope despite my ticket that either Minnesota or Oklahoma City, the young up-and-coming teams that currently sit first and second in the Western Conference standings, can make a run in the playoffs when it matters the most and the games are the most significant. I'm not sure it happens, but I still have hope. So I'm going to sell that notion as well. Last week was the final bit of action we had before the NBA All-Star break, and in his second-to-last game before the All-Star break, Victor Wembanyama put on a display. Now a minus 600 favorite to be the NBA Rookie of the Year. He is looking like that first overall pick, the prodigy that was guaranteed. 27 points, 14 boards, 10 blocks. That a triple-double with blocks and 5 dimes. Is a quadruple double doable? Buy or sell? Victor Wembanyama will be the next player to record a quadruple-double. We have seen 4 in NBA history, not since 1994, and a San Antonio Spurs legend in David Robinson.
Yeah, let's buy this because he's one of the few guys, if any of the guys in the NBA, that in the flow of a game can get 10 blocks.
Yeah.
And when you're taking a look at head-hunting triple-doubles, right, like, ooh, you know what? I only got 2 assists here. Let me take the entire second half to make sure I get 8 assists. He could just play regular defense, man, and be like, look up at the scoreboard. Oh, I got 6 blocks in the first half. Didn't realize I had that many blocks here and cruise into it. He's the one specimen in the NBA that can do this. I'm buying it, Ben.
I buy it as well. Why not Victor Wembanyama? The generational talent that has every bit of this in his arsenal, every attribute that he would need to record a quadruple-double. I think that Victor Wembanyama can get it done. And why not follow in the footsteps of a former number 1 overall selection for San Antonio in the Admiral? 4 in NBA history. Nate Thurman in 1974. Alvin Robertson in 1986. And Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon back in 1990, as well as Robinson in 1994. Franchise tag tender time in the National Football League.
Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA until proven otherwise. Like, you have that guy on your team, you win 50 games, it's really that simple.
There is voter fatigue, and I think that is the only thing you have to be careful about when you deal with the NBA is there voter fatigue in regards to who should win the MVP? When you look at the odds, and obviously you get, no Halliburton.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8, right? This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8. 6 you lose, 7 you push, 8 you win. So it's going to come down to the end.
And he missed the 3, and they are not going to foul. They're not going to foul. He just drove and scored, though. Oh, they gave up a dunk with 14.1 to go.
In-game live, prime time, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
What about any confidence, faith, optimism for them to get back into the top 4?
But in terms of the league form, a lot of times it kind of drops off towards the end of the season because he demands a lot of his players. And they don't quite have the subs for rotation that some of the other teams around them have. So a little bit of a drop-off, I think, is expected for Aston Villa here.
Pro League Soccer powered by Marca, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Throughout the NFL offseason here in 2024, there are going to be days like this, a notable day on the National Football League calendar that we explained to you, because starting today, we have a 2-week window where the franchise tag can be placed on members of individual NFL organizations. Not all 32 NFL clubs have a candidate who could be potentially placed under the franchise tag or transition tag tender, but some big names around the sport. A 2-week window starts on this Tuesday, and it runs through Tuesday, March 5th. Of course, this was a big conversation last offseason, Donnie, with some of the big running backs around the sport: Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, and namely Lamar Jackson, that kind of sent his contract tizzy with the Baltimore Ravens into its full tailspin. So we'll look at some big names around the NFL that are up for the franchise tag and what we expect their organization to end up doing. I mentioned at this time last year, one of the names that highlighted the franchise tag window, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. This time around, one of the names that will highlight the franchise tag window, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. Of course, they placed him under the tag. He held out. They agreed to a deal, a restructured deal for a 1-year deal that kind of looked like what the franchise tag would be. The estimated value under the tag for a running back this season, as everything works up, $11.3 million. So tag, trade, or extend, what do you think the G-men do with Saquon Barkley entering 2024?
Yeah, and by the way, we'll start here with this, the franchise tag in itself, right? It's one of the more wild things that we see in sports. That thought process through, Ben, does make a lot of sense. Hey, look, we just don't want to lose our superstar player. We want rights to him. We're going to pay him like the highest paid player in the sport for 1 year. It should be great. The players hate it, and also the teams hate it at the same time. So I have no idea how it keeps getting negotiated back into CBAs when nobody actually likes it. And you say, well, Donnie, how could they not like getting 1 year at the highest mark? Well, because it's football. You could get injured and nothing is guaranteed to you. So you want that long-term commitment and that money up front here as opposed to the franchise tag. From a team perspective, let's just take a quarterback situation, right? If it was Lamar Jackson, well, okay, we'll tag you $55 million a year, which you can't kick that can down the street, and crushes your overall, salary cap situation for a team. So under those guys, most teams and players want to avoid this. Now, let's get to the New York Giants and Saquon Barkley. One of the worst won franchises over the past 5 to 6 years has been the New York Giants, by doing things like drafting a running back high when the team wasn't able to win or wasn't ready to win football games. It was drafting a quarterback that had no business being in New York and then doubling down on said thing by making him a $45 million a year player. Now, that doesn't have any fault to do with Saquon Barkley. He wants to be a Giant, and he's a quality running back. But if you are the New York Giants, what are you doing re-signing Saquon Barkley? You're not winning next year. You don't even have your quarterback yet. So the simple fact of the matter is, if he's a great running back, sooner or later you turn into a not-so-great running back. Not because of what you can't do on the field. It's the injury process and the amount of carries that you're putting on your body. The tread on the tires just goes away. For my money, if you're the New York Giants, you try to work out a trade and get anything back for Saquon Barkley. And again, it's not a knock on Barkley. He could be tremendous on a team that's willing to put the money in to win a Super Bowl and who's ready. Saquon Barkley to the Buffalo Bills, absolute home run. Saquon Barkley and the Giants, a ridiculously bad option. You can't sign Saquon Barkley. You got to try to trade him if you're the Giants.
Completely agree. And I think if the New York Giants did put the franchise tag tender on Saquon Barkley, what would that relationship look like, knowing what we saw entering last year in 2023 and before even training camp began for the G-men? I think there will be a trade, or at least the New York Giants will go around the NFL to see what value and assets they can get back for Saquon Barkley. It's probably not going to be a first round or second round pick, maybe a third, fourth, fifth round selection, and a couple of those draft picks for Saquon Barkley. The Giants in a very interesting position, though, because of where all the money and draft picks have been tied up for Big Blue with Saquon and now Daniel Jones. The Giants can get out of the Daniel Jones contract after this year, but he's really still their guy, at least financial investment-wise, for 2024. But Big Blue does have the 6th overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, a precarious offseason ahead for Brian Daboll and Joe Shane after last year, such an optimistic offseason for the New York Giants following 2022. One of the biggest names who I think will be fascinating to follow in this franchise tag market, the wide receiver in Cincinnati, T. Higgins. Jamar Chase is going to get his. Joe Burrow has already got his. What happens to T. Higgins? He has expressed a desire to be a number one option for an NFL team. He's not necessarily that in Cincinnati. 1-1A, I could hear you, but he's not going to be the guy for the Bengals with Jamar Chase there. So what do the Bengals do, Donnie, with T. Higgins?
By the way, shout out to T. Higgins, too. No holdouts here, playing under a contract, saying, you know what, I don't have too many future years here left onto it, but I'm going to be a good soldier and put up great numbers. T. Higgins is going to be a very good wide receiver for another organization outside Cincinnati. Let's also remember this. The Cincinnati Bengals were one of those teams that was like, you know what, practice facility, the same as the stadium itself. I don't want to pay for anything. And by the way, my stadium name is Paul Brown Stadium. Oh, no, Joe Burrow wants a contract. Guess why it's called Paycor Stadium now? Because they couldn't afford to just go on as is. They had to sell assets enough to just get their quarterback to stay in town. So the reason I'm building this is you can't sign everybody. There is a salary cap in the NFL unless you're guys like Stan Kroenke of the Rams and you just continue to print more money and, kick the can down the road. Cincinnati doesn't do that. Right. But also the reason being is Jamar Chase is going to come over the top with a ski mask like you haven't seen before, and rightfully so, to be maybe the highest paid wide receiver in the history of football. He's going to fight that out with Justin Jefferson. So case in point, we can't have a top 3 paid all-time quarterback, have the highest paid wide receiver in the history of the sport, and then go, hey, T, how about number 3 overall? Because T. Higgins isn't going to take a discount. Like, you know what, man? Jamar's my boy. Let him make that $200 million contract. I'm good over here with $75 million as a total contract. That's not happening here. It's just the way the NFL works. You can't have 2 of the top highest paid wide receivers and quarterback and still have enough money for defense here. Lou Anarumo probably would end up retiring if they signed T. Higgins, so they go, you know what? We don't have any room for anybody on defense. Just make it happen here. It's just a sign of the times. T. Higgins would love if he could stay in Cincinnati and get paid. That's just not going to happen. Yeah. He's probably just going to end up walking at this point.
$20.7 million is the franchise tag expected salary or value for the wide receiver slot. Again, franchise tag estimated value is based on the annual average salary of that position in the National Football League. It's why the running backs one is less and hasn't really seen a lot of increases over the last 5 to 7 years. It is the only position, in fact, around the National Football League that has not seen growth and yet decline. Even kickers and punters have had their franchise tag tender rise in value. $20.7 million for the wideout spot around the NFL. Now let's go to the Super Bowl champs. If I say the Kansas City Chiefs, you're probably thinking Chris Jones with his contract situation. He can be franchise tagged, although unlikely because it would be his cap hit based on his camp number from a season ago, which would be around $32 million, much higher than what that franchise tag tender value is for a defensive lineman. So the main candidate for KC, L'Jarius Sneed, of course, had a sensational year under Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive back for the Chiefs. Value for the cornerback position, $18.7 million. L'Jarius Sneed had a huge year. Of course, he was known for knocking the ball out of Zay Flowers' hands late in that second half in the AFC Championship game. KC starts to have the cap hit of Patrick Mahomes' contract take its toll, as it did this year, and they still won a Super Bowl championship. What do you expect the Chiefs to do? Tag, trade, extend L'Jarius Sneed?
Certainly different than what we see with Saquon Barkley and the New York Giants. The reason I bring this up is they're not in the Super Bowl window at this point here. The Kansas City Chiefs are all in right now. You have to extend him here. Now, typically, you're right. So why don't you just tag him here? Well, last time we started talking about anger and tagging players, do you remember opening night against the Detroit Lions? Man, remember how good Chris Jones was? Yeah, he was really good sitting up in the stands with his agent side by side as his team played on the football field. You can't have that here. You got to keep the harmony in the locker room. You must extend the cornerback position here, because the one thing you do know is, let's just say, Ben, it cost you a chance to go, you know what? It's either going to be L'Jarius Sneed or we add a top-flight wide receiver. Well, what did we do last year? Well, we had L'Jarius Sneed and won a Super Bowl and didn't have a top-flight wide receiver. Look how that worked out. I do the same thing. You can't risk losing him. Your window is now. Even if it costs you, Ben, 3 to 4 years down the line, your strike zone is right now to win more Super Bowls and go for a three-peat at this point. You got to be able to find that a way for me to extend Sneed.
Brett Veach is one of the best general managers and front office executives around the NFL. Of course, he is the GM in Kansas City. But Mahomes starts to have that cap hit take its impact into this Chiefs roster in terms of how they build it. Chris Jones at the Super Bowl parade said, "I am coming back." If his agents had told him to say that or not, he did utter it. We would expect to see a reworked deal for Chris Jones as well. How many people can they afford to trade? That franchise tag tender in the value of $18.7 million might actually be more than what the Chiefs could broker in a deal for L'Jarius Sneed. We'll see how they play things out. Josh Allen could be franchise tagged, not the quarterback in Buffalo. That would be the edge rusher linebacker in Jacksonville for the Jaguars. He is a prime franchise tag candidate this year. Linebackers, $22.7 million. Officially, that is his roster designation. Defensive ends, $20.2 million. They might want to recategorize him as an edge rusher and save a couple $1 million there in Duval County. I would expect the Jags to franchise tag Josh Allen. What do you think, Donnie?
Yeah, tag and work out a deal here. You can't lose. Again, like we talked about the cornerback position, there's so few and far between dominant pass rushers, which is the way you change the landscape in the NFL. You can't just let him walk. And also, if you think that you can get away with, hey, you know what? Couldn't come to an agreement on a tag. $20 million seems like a lot. That's not a lot of money for defensive ends ready to get capital on the free market here. You're talking about a contract that's probably going to deal with $80 to $90 million in guaranteed funds. You think he's actually going to come to the table and say, yeah, I'll play 1 year at $20 million? No shot here. If you tag him, he's missing part of the season. You better work out a long-term deal and agreement there, because, again, these guys just don't grow on trees. You got to find a way to sign him, because he's not going to work, Ben, under the tag. He's just not going to do that.
You saw the stats, by the way, in the production out of Josh Allen. He is one of the most talented young edge rushers in the National Football League. 17.5 sacks last year for a Jacksonville defense that mightily struggled at the end. But Josh Allen was one of the highlights of that defensive front. And that's where Jacksonville needs to build moving forward. We talked about the AFC championship prices yesterday, Donnie. The AFC South now as a division, once it was kind of an afterthought, actually might be one of the more fun and exciting divisions with the young up-and-coming Houston Texans led by C.J. Stroud. And despite the stumble last year down the stretch, the Jaguars being a player, offensively need to protect Trevor Lawrence a little bit more, and defensively need to keep those stars in-house. That is Josh Allen.
Yes, it is. And you can't lose them if you want to have a good season here. You can, hey, let's just go out in the draft and repeat this. Keep them in-house, but also they come at a premium price tag. Have you seen the amount that outside linebackers and defensive ends are making lately in the NFL? Yeah, again, he's not coming back under the franchise tag with a smile on his face.
No. Yes, the reworked extension we would expect for Josh Allen. Don't forget, you can tag somebody and still negotiate in this window up until a certain point as we approach training camp. The Daytona 500 recap and reaction with NASCAR guy Donnie Rightside next.
Best player in the NBA until proven otherwise. Like you have that guy on your team, you win 50 games. It's really that simple.
There is voter fatigue, and I think that is the only thing you have to be careful about when you deal with the NBA is there voter fatigue in regards to who should win the MVP? When you look at the odds, and obviously you get, no Halliburton.
The early line, only on SportsGrid.
This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8, right? This is going to fall 6, 7, or 8. 6 you lose, 7 you push, 8 you win. So it's going to come down to the end.
And he missed the 3, and they are not going to foul. They're not going to foul. He just drove and scored, though. Oh, they gave up a dunk with 14.1 to go.
In-game live, prime time, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
What about any confidence, faith, optimism for them to get back into the top 4?
But in terms of the league form, a lot of times it kind of drops off towards the end of the season because he demands a lot of his players. And they don't quite have the subs for rotation that some of the other teams around them have. So a little bit of a drop-off, I think, is expected for Aston Villa here.
Pro League Soccer powered by Marca, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Daytona Day in Donnie Right-Side's household. It wasn't the end that DRS was hoping for. A victorious end for Hendricks Motorsports and William Byron wins the Daytona 500. Not the first mistake I have made breaking down the Daytona 500 in the last 24 hours here on the early line. 18-1 number for Byron, tied for the 11th best price entering the Daytona 500 in the Sunshine State in Florida. Weather affected it, delayed it to Monday. It finished under caution because of a large crash behind William Byron as he crossed the checker flag. And then he was asking his pit crew, did I win? I saw the caution flag go up. Did I win? They needed to confirm for Byron that, in fact, he had won the Daytona 500. What an illustrious start to the season for William Byron and Hendricks Motorsports. But mainly, Donnie, we go to you. Brad Keselowski was your extra best bet yesterday in buy. He looked good through most of the race because of that large dust up at the end. He finishes 33rd. Your thoughts?
By the way, my thoughts on this would be, I'm glad you sort of surmised how it ended yesterday, that race. So a little San Francisco 40 was Kyle Shanahan, the pit crew leader, that had no idea that the race was going to be won, and neither did his driver at this point.
Roasted.
So, Mecole Hardman scoring a touchdown, going like, I didn't even know if we had won the football game or not. What is up with some of the big, they call it the Super Bowl of racing, right? So again, you should know the rules heading in. But by the way, I did get robbed in this. Keselowski should have won this thing. Eight laps, Ben, left there. My guy's sitting in second place, and I heard the good word before that. I knew exactly what he was looking to do in the final 10 laps of that race, and the execution would have been perfect with a W there. Because Keselowski, I was hosed on this one here. It was the perfect cap that got just, into a crash, and nothing I could do about it. That's all it is. Nothing I could do.
Listen, we've got our IFBs in, right? Donnie had his IFB in yesterday. He was with the pit crew in Daytona for Keselowski. He knew we were going shake and bake in those final 8 laps for Keselowski to go up to the front and win the Daytona 500. Instead, it's a 33rd finish. Hour 2 in less than a minute here on the Early Line.